Good morning. I apologize for the late start. There's a lot of moving parts at the sanctuary. And because of that, there's a lot of things that's got to fall in line. So we're here. So we've been studying about the last Sunday, and this is, hang on a second. I'm lesson 1. We're starting a new one. All right, I thought I was lesson 2, but no, this is the second unit of the year, and I'm lesson 1, and we're going to be talking about grace. Grace for outsiders. And this one is called Kindness for the Father's Sake. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about some stories in the Bible and some things we can learn from it. And understanding that anytime I'm the teacher, it's guaranteed I'm teaching to myself way more than you. So just keep that in mind. So if I say something and you're like, well, do you just assume that I am under conviction from the word, because I always want the word to work on me before I ever give it to anybody else. So the conviction is all mine, and you are welcome to share in it if you would like. Our focus verse is 2 Samuel 9:7. The screen will give it to you in the King James Version. I will be reading it in the English Standard Version. And David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always." So that's just kind of the focus verse that we're going to be aiming at. Now, there's the lesson text are stories about David. It's in 1 Samuel 20, 2 Samuel 7, 2 Samuel 9. So if you really want to, you can read those, and it'll give you a lot of backstory to what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be learning a truth about God, and that is that God's grace is extended to everyone, including those who we don't think deserve it. And then the truth that we need to learn about ourselves is, I will receive God's grace and extend it to those in need. So those are our two objectives. That's the things we want to capture in this lesson today. Is this microphone extremely loud? I thought so. I keep lowering it down, and I'm running out of arm. I have T-Rex arms, so I can only go to, if you don't mind turning me down a little bit. Thank you. My voice carries anyway, and you put a mic in front of me, and it's like, bless your hearts. I need your help today. I, last November, suffered overnight hearing loss in my right ear. It's got a name. It's all kinds of impressive. But what it means is, this is the truly cruel part. Not only did I lose a lot of hearing in my right ear, I got to include Niagara Falls in the loss of it, because that's what I hear in this ear, shh, at all times. So it's like, so let me get this straight. I asked my doctor, I said, so I'm losing that hearing, but I can still hear Niagara Falls. And he's like, yeah, sorry. So what that means for you, when I ask a question for interaction, I need you to scream your answers at me, because they insist I stand up here, which means I can't hear you. So we do some and if you guys want to sit way back there, that is totally cool, but just understand I may not be able to hear you that well. So yell it at me. This ear is supposedly fine, but it doesn't mean that this ear does not override it for some reason. So now that you all feel sorry for me, you're welcome to pray my healing. I am totally okay with that. I want God to receive glory, but I am a big fan of him receiving glory through healing. So put that on your prayer list. All right, just before Christmas, in 1982, in Melbourne, Australia, the Wojcik family was ready to welcome their son into the world. Now, this was before those, creepy 4D sonograms. Have you seen those sonograms that you can see the baby like it's right in front of you? I don't know why those creep me out. Because I don't have a problem with babies. I mean, we've got 2 new ones in our family, and I just adore them. But, ooh, those 4D sonograms, it's like alien. Whatever. I'm glad they exist for y'all. But anyway, before then, this family saw their baby through those regular sonograms that were less creepy, and they did not see any complications. So they were so excited about this new baby coming. Now, as soon as he was born, they were stunned, because he was born, they had no clue it was coming, but he was born with a rare syndrome called tetraamelia. It's a tetraamelia syndrome, and it's a disorder that is marked by a lack of arms and legs. And so you can see a picture there of Nick. And according to Nick Wojcik's autobiography, right after he was born, his mom wouldn't hold him. She couldn't look at him. It was too much for her. And when they released her from the hospital, she and her husband, Nick's dad, they left the hospital, went home, and they just had to sit down and process what was life going to be like for the rest of Nick's future and what was their future going to look like in their commitment to care for him. Now, Nick grew. Of course, they took him home, loved their son. They're raising him. As he grew and enrolled in elementary school, he was understandably the target of a lot of jokes and bullying, really. And at one point, he was so upset with all of this, he tried to drown himself in a bathtub. Now remember, he's in elementary school. And someone saved him. He wondered why he struggled while other kids didn't. He even questioned, what is the point of my life? What can I contribute? His parents recognized his depression and his loneliness, and they were trying to help him see the positive. But it wasn't until he met Jesus that he said, I now have the strength to meet day to day. At 19 years old, Nick gave his first inspirational talk and realized that his life could inspire others to overcome whatever challenges they were facing. Now, though he didn't have fully formed legs, he was born with 1 foot just a few inches below his left hip. 1 foot, and the toes on that foot were actually fused together. But he underwent an operation. They were able to separate the toes, so he now uses those toes as his fingers. He refers to them as his chicken drumstick. I know. He can type up, this right here blows my mind. He can type up to 43 words a minute. That is just above the average of a non-professional typist. Since his first inspirational talk, he has shared his story with millions of people, stadiums full of people, and even then down to youth groups. So he has covered it all. When he turned 32, he founded what was called Life Without Limbs, but it's now called Nick V Ministries, and it's where he still serves as president and CEO, and it's a nonprofit foundation. After he founded that, when he was 39 years old, in 2012, he married, and now he and his wife have 4 children. Nick is an author. Listen to this. He's an author, a speaker, a musician, an actor, and listen to his hobbies: fishing, painting, swimming. Now you remember, dude has no arms and no legs, and these are his hobbies. He does all of this without them. His story continues to amaze those who hear it, and it's a living example of someone who overcame major challenges to make an impact. And that's because people helped him overcome those major challenges to make an impact. Today's lesson, we're going to talk about a biblical example of how a man after God's heart treated somebody with a disability and they were able to overcome. Someone who was marginalized, someone who may not have measured up to the accepted norm. Now, please understand, this is not a woke lesson. This is not about let's be kind to everybody, let's embrace everybody, even though we should. This is not a woke lesson, it's a be like Jesus lesson. So it's not going to just cover our treatment of an attitude regarding people with disabilities or obvious differences, even though we do have to treat them like Jesus would treat them. But it's also going to cover those with wounds and scars and growth issues that maybe we can't see. Grace is something that I must share, regardless of who I share it with. I've got to share it with everybody if I want to be like Jesus. So let's dive in. Before the kings in Israel, God wanted to be their king. He was Israel's king. They knew this. But Israel, like so many people today, wanted to fit in their community and in their areas. They wanted to fit in. How many times I see people do crazy things because they want to fit in. And this is not just kids who do it. I see adults do it. They want to fit in. Well, Israel looked around and everybody else had really cool kings with really cool thrones and really cool palaces, and they wanted that too. They wanted to fit in, and God said, fine. Even though it was a rejection of him, God accommodated it. And Samuel anointed Saul as king. Now, I am going to say this in case there are people here whose biblical knowledge is not as advanced as others. This Saul that we're talking about is not Saul/Paul in the New Testament. This is King Saul in the Old Testament. I just want to make sure there's no confusion. Sometimes when people have the same names in the Bible, and it could be that everybody here is like, duh, but I just wanted to make sure. So, while externally Saul seemed to be the ideal candidate for king, He was tall, handsome, strong, and at this time, humble, because you remember they couldn't find him to anoint him. He was hiding because he was like, what is going on? So he had humility at that point. Unfortunately, he was an ideal candidate, but internally, different plans were going to develop. Instead of executing the will of God, Saul was going to execute his own will. God ultimately rejected Saul because Saul believed his ways were better than God's, and that led us to young David. Now, you know the story. David had brothers, lots of brothers. Sorry, hang on. Apparently a large animal has crawled into my throat. David was the youngest, and his job, his chores, if you think I will not come out there, Brother Dale Fergie's clapping like, you won't be the first person I've smacked this morning. So, actually, yes, you would, but I would enjoy every second of it. Stop interrupting my lesson, I'm busy. All right, so, David's the baby of the family. He's keeping sheep. All right, so Samuel, Israel's last judge, was called to anoint a new king over Israel since God had rejected Saul as king. What made this complicated is Saul was still very much on the throne. But God said, Samuel, I need you to go get a king because this guy is not cutting it. So Samuel arrived at Jesse's house. Now, Jesse had to have been a little surprised. This was before text and telephone. So I don't know that he knew that that Samuel was even coming. But he shows up. Here's this prophet to visit Jesse's home. Now, the prophet asked Jesse to assemble his sons because God told Samuel, I'm going to tell you who the king's going to be, and it's going to come from Jesse's sons. So the Bible doesn't indicate whether or not Jesse knew why Samuel was there. An argument could be made that he didn't know because God had told Samuel, you invite Jesse and his boys to go to a sacrifice. In other words, let's have a worship service together. It had to be Samuel's cover story because he was about to commit treason. So Jesse called his sons, and they assembled before Samuel. And maybe, you can see Samuel walking before them, stroking his beard, looking him up and down. And these guys had to be like, what is happening here? Do we cut the mustard? What is happening? Likely everyone was maybe a little nervous, but Samuel probably was the most nervous. He had the most to lose. If Saul found out Samuel was out seeking a new king, it's a very good chance that Samuel was going to be missing a head. After examining all of Jesse's sons standing before him, God spoke to Samuel and he said, not one of these guys are the right candidate. The previous king had checked all the boxes of looking good, having the right persona, having the right intimidation factor. But God said, you remember God said, man looks on the outward appearance, but I look on the heart. So God said, I'm going to anoint someone else. Confused, Samuel said to Jesse, do you have any more sons by any chance? And Jesse was like, oh, yeah, my youngest, he's out tending the sheep. And at that point, that brings us to this question. Why do you think, now remember, you got to scream at me. Why do you think Jesse excluded David when Samuel told him to assemble his sons? Why wasn't, everybody's got that one. If you got more than 4 kids, there's going to be that one you forget. And I could tell you who it is in our family, but I won't because that would be rude. But it's maybe the quiet one, maybe the one that isn't quite always in trouble, but they're always one. I rarely got overlooked, shockingly enough. But there's always that one kid you forget. So what made Jesse forget this one? What do you think? Just throw it out. Too young. David at this point was not old enough to be a soldier, was not old enough to be doing anything. It's most likely he was a teenager under the age of 20. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. He was too young. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, he was a musician. I don't want some musician out being my king. No, just kidding. Don't tell Jeremy Hoffey. But no, he was the little guy. He was out there. I look at him with his red hair with the little cowlick. He's playing music, but he's also got that slingshot picking off lizards. This kid was a brat. So for whatever reason, Jesse did not bring him up. Anybody else got some ideas you want to throw out? He's too young. He's too sensitive. Huh? Yeah. His brothers were these big strapping soldiers or going to be soldiers, and here comes this scrawny little teenager who still has some growing to do, and he didn't look strong enough. These are all very valid and good reasons. And be real honest with you, the Bible doesn't tell us why Jesse forgot about him. He wasn't a warrior. He was under 20. We don't really know why Jesse didn't call David with the rest of his sons, but I'm going to step out on a limb and say we could come up with some pretty logical reasons. David was not at that point in a position to be of any interest to Samuel, according to Jesse. If someone came in here and said, I have a vitally important role that needs to be played in this country, and somebody from this church is going to play it, they are going to run something, what is the chance we're going to send them up to the children's ministry to get that person? My submission is we wouldn't even send them to the youth center. If somebody needs a really important job done, you're going to choose someone who looks like they can get the job done according to normal standards, all right? I definitely would not want them to choose me, but maybe David simply didn't cross Jesse's mind as someone who'd be of interest to the great prophet. He wasn't up to standards at that point. Suddenly, David's out doing his thing, writing a song, playing his lyre, whatever it is, and he hears people calling for him. David, get in here, your dad needs you. So he comes running up. When he arrives, his dad and his brothers are all standing there looking at him. I'm taking creative liberties, obviously. And he's just like, okay. And then he turns and sees the prophet Samuel. Now Samuel's eyes, his eyes had to just, whenever he saw him, because God said, this is him. Now remember, the Bible calls him ruddy, which means he was red, like maybe his hair was red, his face was red. He was just a little redheaded kid, a true kid, running up there. And Samuel walks over and says, stand still, grabs the oil that you used to anoint a king and dumps it on him. And David has to be standing there when that oil is dripping off the end of his nose thinking, what just happened? As quickly as Samuel came, Samuel left. Jesse and all his sons were awestruck with surprise, no doubt. What they didn't know is they had just experienced the grace of God. So, what does grace mean? Now, we have used grace meaning graceful ballet dancers, or people are graceful on the basketball court, in the men's NBA anyway. And so we've got these grace, we use the term grace in those terms. We may say, oh, thank you for your gracious giving. We'll use it that way. But in this way, when the Bible's using it, it's usually using the word grace to refer to the way God continues to view and respond to humanity favorably. In short, God's grace is God's decision to respond to us favorably even when we do not deserve it. It is, in fact, unearned favor, or some call it unmerited favor. When Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden tree, they realized they were completely uncovered, their shame exposed. What did God do? He gracefully walked in and created a covering for them. And then it can be argued that he used his grace and mercy when he drove them out of the garden and put an angel so they couldn't go back in, because the tree of life was in the garden. The tree of life, whatever it was, had healing properties. And God, the last thing he wants is immortal sinners. He did not want his children to have to live forever separated from him. So it was probably an act of grace and mercy that he drove them out of the garden. It could be argued. When Israel cried out to the Lord during years of bondage, God was favorable to them and sent a deliverer like Moses. If you've ever studied Judges and the spiral, now Dr. Seagraves used to say, if it's in the Bible, it means it's true. It doesn't mean it's right. And so in Judges, there's all kinds of true stories that are just, they did wrong. And there's this spiral of Israel. They would come to God and then they would just keep digging deeper. But even in that book, if you look at that spiral and juxtapose it with God's perpetual kindness to them, it shows you how amazing God's grace is. I want you to think of God's grace as his kindness towards us. Then when Israel's request for king violated God's commandments, God responded with undeserved favor and unreserved favor by anointing a new king. Now he's doing it again, and this time he's giving them a king that will grow to be a man after God's own heart. The idea, this is something I'm jumping to here. Thank you, bless your heart. I have a bottle of water. I know exactly where it is in my car. Right by my umbrella. Okay, thank you so much, Megan. I feel like a real preacher now. Excuse me, praise the Lord, everybody, while I drink. There is an idea, you're laughing because you know it's true. I've been in church a while. The idea that human beings they've somehow gotten a raw deal from God is quite common. Think about it. What is the number one question you hear? Why does bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? People are always saying that, like not being horrible entitles me to special exemptions. Why did God let that happen? Have I relegated God to a rabbit's foot, an ATM, or Santa Claus? I don't know. Maybe that's why it's happened. Or maybe it happened because God has things in store for me that I don't see. Because bad things happen. And we believe sometimes we've worked hard. We're entitled to rewards. I am a child of God. I should not be feeling this pain. I'm a child of God. I should not have Niagara Falls in my ear. I'm a child of God. My marriage should have worked. We worked hard. We're entitled to rewards, virtues, privileges, and blessings. Hey, I've been good to God. But here's the thing. It's only by God's grace that you are given those good gifts, not because you deserve it. You can't bank up grace. I'm paying a debt. I'm not putting things in a bank for future reference. Have you ever felt, and you don't have to answer this, have you ever felt that God treated you unfairly by not giving you what you thought you deserved, or maybe by giving you something you didn't think you deserved? I had a professor in undergrad who told a story. She said, you haven't met somebody who prayed harder and fasted more and sought God's face more about my marriage. Before she got married, she said, God, I'm seeking your face. She married a man that she believed was God's will for her life, and it fell apart spectacularly. And she said, I remember standing there so angry because she said, I would see people that I had gone to college with who embraced immorality like their life depended on it. And she said, and I was looking at them now having functioning, happy, blessed marriages, and I'm standing here divorced, and I knew that I had done what I was supposed to do, and this is how it turned out. She struggled with God giving her something, and it wasn't fair. Now, I have middle child tendencies, even though there's 6 of us. I'm kind of the middle of the second family. And when I say fairness matters to me, ooh, it's like I can't handle unfair things. And so I understand this. I want God to be fair. If you sin, you should pay for it. If I have done right, I should get good gifts. But what we have to understand is that Romans 3:23 says this, all y'all have sinned. You are far short of the glory of God. So again, I'm not banking up grace. I'm paying a debt, and God is giving me grace to let me do it. We realize, truthfully, none of us deserve grace. Nevertheless, God is so unfair to us. He is so unfair, and I don't know about you, but I am so grateful he's unfair. Because a fair God would make me a grease spot in the road for the stuff I've done. A fair God would not, in fact, bless us when we don't deserve it. A fair God treats us the way we deserve to be treated. But my God is so unfair. He, instead of responding with justice, he responds with grace. Despite our flaws, he looks at us favorably. Where only sinfulness exists, my God sees the potential for holiness. I am so glad that when I don't measure up to what the norm should be or what should be, my life should be as a Christian, my God unfairly gives me unmerited favor. we better thank God Almighty that he is so unfair. I am grateful for that. God uses his grace so that through this favor, we can be transformed, so we can become the people he calls us to be. He gives graciously. David said this, your cup runs over. It's like my cup's running over. And likewise, God gives grace to us so that we can let that cup run over and let that grace lead others along the process of transformation, healing, and reconciliation. The same things we need. Our cup does not run over with God's grace so we can be just secure and taking care of ourselves. No, we are to be a conduit. We are vessels. Regardless of what we think others may deserve, we're not reservoirs, we're conduits of God's grace. And that's what I have to remember. I'm not here to bank it up. I'm here to pass it on. God's tremendous grace kept David and carried him from a shepherd's field to a battlefield, to exile in the wilderness, finally to the throne. So David knew through his experience that God was with him, even when, as David said, he walked through the valley of the shadow of death. But once David was in the palace, he looked back at all the grace God had just dumped on him. And there's a song, James Fortune, I love this guy's music, and he sings a song about the favor of God is on me. And in the middle of it, he says, it's like favor be stalking me, y'all. And I love that, the thought that God's favor is hunting me down. I love that. And so David could see God's favor had hunted him down. And he felt compelled to spread that favor, that grace to others. And his mind went to Saul's family. This was the Saul whose authority he usurped through God. The Saul who was on the throne, but now David was there. Yes, Saul's son, Jonathan, was David's BFF, but it didn't change the fact that family Von Saul knew David got the throne instead of one of Saul's offsprings. They should have been royalty, but instead they were dead or in exile. So these guys knew what the score was, but David said they need grace. Truthfully, Jonathan, Saul's son, could have treated David as an enemy because David's existence and anointing stood in the way of Jonathan getting the throne. Now listen, Jonathan may not have known about David being anointed as king, but it doesn't matter because Jonathan certainly heard the songs that the Israelites sang about. Saul's killed his thousands, but David's got 10,000, and they're just singing away. And Jonathan's hearing this about his dad, realizing Israel is totally in love with David. And his dad's like, nah, old news. He could have been very resentful of this, but he showed grace to David. And David could have seen Jonathan as competition to the throne, but he didn't. David genuinely mourned when he heard of the death of Saul and his best friend Jonathan. They died in battle, and David was so sad. Now, this happened before David decided to share grace. David's heart was broken for this, and several years later, he realized, I want to honor them by being gracious to whatever remains of Saul's house. In other kingdoms, when a new ruler took over, his job was to make sure there was nobody left to usurp him. So when a new king came in, everybody else pretty much understood the old king's family was getting taken care of. David had no such plan. He had experienced the grace of God, and now he was going to spread it to Saul's family. Now, Saul had a grandson named Mephibosheth, someone deeply in need of a nickname. But Mephibosheth was Jonathan's son. And when word came that the Philistines were defeating Israel at Mount Gilboa, and they had already killed Saul and his heir apparent, Jonathan, Mephibosheth was a child. His nanny was terrified. They were going to come and kill him. So she grabs him, and they start running. Now, I don't know if she was climbing something, whatever. She almost had to have been, we just sort of tell the story of she dropped him. But for a 5-year-old boy to be lame for the rest of his life, she had to have dropped him from a pretty good distance, I would think, to break his legs and his feet that badly. Regardless, in their travels to get out of there, Mephibosheth became lame for the rest of his life. Now, he and his nurse went into exile in the north, and that's probably, most likely they stayed in exile because David as king, he was raised hearing don't go back to Jerusalem so the king there doesn't smash you, because you are, in fact, the grandson of the other king. So they stayed in exile. Now, Mephibosheth's disability, it wasn't just that he lost his home, his dad, his grandpa, everything. He lost the respect of the Israelite society because, listen carefully, if something bad happened to you, it's because you deserved it. Your parents sinned, you sinned, somebody in your family sinned, but if you were disabled, something bad happened for you. For that, you deserved that somehow. Somehow you had earned that disability. Unfortunately, we see in John 9, thousands of years later, that was still a prevailing wisdom when Jesus was walking the planet. Who did sin that this man was born blind? Read John 9. It's amazing when Jesus explains why the man was born blind. But that's another story for another day. Mephibosheth was eking out a living on the margins of society, not only because he was of a deposed king's family, but he also had a disability. That would have marked him as a grievous sinner in Israelite society. When I say boy didn't measure up, I'm not kidding. He did not measure up to societal norms. He was not worthy of the attention of society. Some years later, though, David sought out his family. So what he said in 2 Samuel, he said, I want to show them the kindness of God. I want to show them grace. David learned of Mephibosheth. He said, go get him. It had to scare Mephibosheth to death that the king was all of a sudden hunting him down. But anyway, he shows up at the palace. And David said, all of your grandpa's lands, I'm giving them back to you. He said, not only that, you can stay here with me and you're going to eat at my table. Now, you have to understand, kings didn't have disabled people sitting at their table, but David wasn't a normal king. David was a graceful king. He was a king who knew God had been gracious to him and he was giving it to others. So you can shake your head and smile at David's lavish grace. Not only did he give Mephibosheth access to a life of luxury and comfort, but David lifted him out of the margins of society and planted him into a position of prominence. Because at this point, Mephibosheth went from an exiled guy eking out a living to now he managed lands that were rightfully his and made a profit, and he created generational wealth through it. David's generous, gracious act gave Mephibosheth power over his future and access to meaningful purpose for his life. Mephibosheth should have been no concern to David, just like David should have been of no concern to Samuel. But both were allowed so much more because of the grace of God. Some may have seen Mephibosheth as an enemy or threat to David's rule. Others would have seen him as a sinner because of his disability. Today, Mephibosheth could have been the subject of pity, or even worse, the subject of a virtue signaling photo op. Look at me being nice to this guy in the wheelchair. Welcome back, Sister Norris. But God has so much more in mind for all of us, regardless of ability or inability, no matter the source of our wounds, no matter the depth of our scars. He has more in mind because he is an unfair God who bestows grace on those of us who do not deserve it. David saw someone to whom he could show God's abundant grace because he had been a recipient of God's abundant grace. He'd come a long way since shepherding his sheep. I mean, we can attest to that. Nevertheless, he lived the lesson he'd learned. He said, my cup runs over, and because my cup runs over, it's going to splash on the people around me. I'm going to make sure of it. He extended God's grace. Well, guess what? My cup overruns with grace too. God has been so good to me. And what kind of a jerk would I be if I do not extend that grace to others? If you ever wondered if you're a terrible person, the answer is yes. If you don't extend God's grace when you've been given so much. Talk about rude. When we rate someone as undeserving of God's grace or beneath the notice of God's grace, think of Matthew 7, the little speck in their eye. We're looking around the big beam in our eye saying, you really should do something different. And the whole time you've got this big old log hanging out of your face. God still maintains a favorable attitude of grace towards humankind when we do not deserve it. So guess what Christians who want to be like Jesus must do? This means people who look different from me, speak different from me, act different from me. I cannot be a grace withholder just because sin broke them in a different place than it broke me. I must extend grace. Are there people, and do not answer this, just think it. Are there people that you believe are undeserving of God's grace? Terrorists who fly airplanes into buildings? Neo-Nazis? Abortionists? There are people who don't deserve God's grace. They don't deserve God's mercy. But guess what? None of us do. The second I start thinking, I'll never forget a missionary said this, and I believe it saved my life. He said the second we start thinking our sin is not as bad as someone else's is the second we stop understanding how sin works. And even though none of us deserve it, God has made us worthy because we are his peculiar treasure. 1 Peter 4:10 says this, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace, all the grace he has. He's called us to be stewards or managers of that grace. Whenever we get those gifts, they are not given to us to put on a shelf to admire. They are given to us to extend to others, even those who are marginalized and disenfranchised. Between you and Jesus, think now of someone who needs grace, and then think, how can I extend that? Who do I come in contact with that so desperately needs grace? We're almost done here. My sister, when she was going to school to get her counseling degree and license, one of her assignments was to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And when she went there, they knew why she was there. She came in. She said, those people, I have never been more welcomed in a room in my life. She said, when they came in, they joked with me, they introduced themselves, they said hi to her, offered her snacks, drinks. She said, I felt, it was crazy how welcome she felt. Probably because those people remembered what it was like to be in a ditch. They remembered what it was like to be bound in addiction. And when somebody walked through that door, regardless of the reason they walked in, they were gonna make sure they had somebody walking beside them so that they could conquer. Should it not also remain that we should remember what it feels like to be a sinner, a person far from God, a person who is starving for grace, like we would be, like a starving man wants his meal. And that should make us, as the body of Christ, the most gracious, the most welcoming place, because I remember what it was like to be where they are. That is why you extend grace. Let's end with this. This is a cute story. This is Mr. Rogers, everybody knows because he was wonderful. In 1969, he aired what was a controversial episode at that time. Cracks me up. In the episode, Fred Rogers has his feet in a small plastic children's swimming pool because he's cooling his feet on a summer day. And he invites Francois Clemens, an African-American police officer, to join him in the pool to cool his feet as well. Now, I'm too young to remember the civil rights movement, but I have heard the stories. It doesn't seem that should be too controversial because the Civil Rights Act was enacted in 1964. But this was 1969 and it was still controversial because there were still places like swimming